Number 1. Marcus Delon Wesson. On March 12, 2004, at a small residence located at 761 West Hammond Avenue near Roding Park in Fresno, California, 9 members of the Wesson family were brutally murdered. The perpetrator was Marcus Delon Wesson, who at the time was 57 years old. The incident involved his daughters and grandchildren, the product of years of incestuous sexual abuse that he committed against his daughters and nieces. Marcus Wesson was born in Kansas City, Missouri. He was the eldest of 4 children born to Benjamin and Carrie Wesson. His childhood was shaped by instability. His mother was a devout member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and Wesson later described her as a religious fanatic. His father struggled with alcoholism and abusive behavior before eventually abandoning the family when Marcus was still young. As a teenager, Wesson dropped out of high school. At the age of 20, in 1966, he joined the United States Army and worked as an ambulance driver. He served until 1968, including deployment in Vietnam, after which he was discharged and returned to California. In the early 1970s, Wesson began living with an older woman named Rosemary Solorio in San Jose, California. Solorio had 8 children, and in 1971 she gave birth to Wesson's son. By 1974, Wesson had turned his attention to Rosemary's 8-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. When Elizabeth turned 14 and Wesson was 34, he married her. 4 months later, Elizabeth gave birth to her first child. Over the years, she bore him 10 children, although 1 died in infancy. In addition, Elizabeth's sisters left several children in Wesson's care, citing their inability to raise them due to personal struggles, including substance addiction. Wesson never maintained steady employment, relying instead on welfare benefits and the wages of his adult children. In 1989, he was convicted of welfare fraud and perjury. The family often moved between rundown houses, boats, and abandoned buildings. Inside the household, Wesson exerted strict and controlling authority. He prevented Elizabeth from raising their children and assumed full responsibility for their education. He created his own handwritten religious texts, teaching the children that he was God and that they must refer to him as Master or Lord. He told them that the girls were destined to become his wives and instructed them in preparation for a coming apocalypse. His religious teachings included disturbing doctrines that combined Christianity with vampiric imagery. Wesson's control was not only spiritual but physical. His children were required to wash his dreadlocks, scratch his scalp and armpits, and obey rigid household rules. The girls were not permitted to speak with their brothers or with their mother. He used physical punishment on both the boys and the girls. By the late 1980s, he began sexually abusing 2 of his daughters and 3 of his nieces. Beginning as young as 8 years old, 5 girls became pregnant by him. By 2004, conflicts emerged between Wesson and extended family members who wanted custody of their children. On March 12th of that year, several relatives, including nieces Sofina Solorio and Ruby Sanchez, arrived at the Fresno residence to demand that their children be released. An argument started, and Fresno police were summoned to the scene, initially regarding the matter as a custody dispute. Officers spoke briefly with Wesson, who told them to wait at the door before retreating into the house. During the standoff, Wesson disappeared inside, and shortly afterward, some family members and witnesses reported hearing gunfire. Police on the scene did not all hear shots, but when Wesson reappeared, his clothing was stained with blood. He surrendered without violence. Inside the small house, officers discovered 9 bodies in a back room where antique coffins had been stored. Each victim had been shot once through the eye. Those brutally murdered were identified. Several other children who were not present inside the house survived the attack. At trial, which took place in 2005 in Fresno County Superior Court, Chief Deputy District Attorney Lisa Gamoyan prosecuted the case. Wesson was represented by public defenders Peter Jones and Ralph Torres. The defense argued that his eldest daughter, Sabrina, had committed the murders and then decided to cause her own death from self-inflicted wounds. They pointed to the .22 caliber handgun found near her body, along with DNA evidence linking her to the weapon. They also highlighted the absence of gunshot residue on Wesson's hands at the time of his arrest. The jury, however, concluded that Wesson bore ultimate responsibility. They did not find that he necessarily pulled the trigger, but that he had created a system of control and directed his family into what amounted to a murder pact. On June 17, 2005, Wesson was convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder and 14 counts of sexual abuse involving his daughters and nieces. On June 27, 2005, he was sentenced to death. During sentencing, Wesson displayed little visible emotion. He did not issue a public statement of remorse and maintained the position that his daughter Sabrina was responsible. His home was later demolished. Since sentencing, Wesson has remained on death row at San Quentin Rehabilitation Center in Marin County, California, and no execution date has been set. As of August 2025, Marcus Delon Wesson has served 20 years on death row at San Quentin. He was 57 years old at the time of the crimes and is 79 years old today. Number 2. Chester Dwayne Turner. On March 9, 1987, in Los Angeles, California, the body of Diane Johnson was discovered in a roadway construction area west of the Harbor Freeway. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and left partially unclothed. This marked the first known brutal murders by Chester Dwayne Turner, who over the next 11 years would murder at least 14 women and an unborn child in South Los Angeles, primarily in a corridor stretching along Figueroa Street between Gage Avenue and 108th Street. Chester Turner was born in Warren, Arkansas. His parents separated when he was 5 years old, after which he moved with his mother to Los Angeles, California. He attended public schools and later Locke High School but left before graduating. As a young man, he worked at Domino's Pizza as a cook and delivery driver while living with his mother. When his mother later moved to Utah, Turner moved between shelters and missions, frequently experiencing homelessness. He fathered 4 children with separate women, one of whom he had with longtime girlfriend Felicia Collier in the early 1990s. Turner had a long history of criminal conduct prior to his identification as a serial killer. He was jailed several times between 1987 and 2002, serving terms for theft, substance possession, and car theft. In April 1997, he was arrested for assaulting a police officer and cruelty to an animal. His longest single prison term before his capture came in 2002, when he was sentenced to 8 years in state prison for the sexual assault of Maria Martinez, a 47-year-old woman he attacked after asking her for a lighter. He choked and assaulted her for 2 hours before threatening her life if she reported the crime. The string of murders began in 1987. After Diane Johnson's death in March, the body of 33-year-old Elandra Joyce Bunn was discovered in June of that year, lying unclothed in a pile of trash. She had been severely beaten and choked to death also. Later that same year, in October, 26-year-old Annette Ernest was found partially unclothed along the shoulder of a road, also choked to death. In January 1989, 31-year-old Anita Fishman Breyer was discovered in an alley off Figueroa Street. That September, 27-year-old Regina Nadine Washington was found strangled inside a garage. She was 6 months pregnant, and her unborn baby, known as Baby Washington, was also ruled a homicide victim. Between 1992 and 1993, Turner brutally murdered 6 more women, including 32-year-old Deborah Williams, 41-year-old Mary Edwards, and 29-year-old Andrea Triplett, who was 5.5 months pregnant. In May 1993, 29-year-old Desiree Jones was found strangled in a backyard. In 1995, 31-year-old Natalie Price was found dead near a vacant residence, followed in 1996 by the strangulation of 45-year-old Mildred Beasley, whose body was found beside the 110 freeway. In 1997, 30-year-old Cynthia Johnson was found strangled in Green Meadows. Turner's final victims were Paula Donnell Vance in February 1998, whose attack was partially recorded on security cameras, and 39-year-old Brenda Breeze, found in a portable toilet near Little Tokyo in April 1998, just yards from where Turner was living at the time. For years, the murders remained unsolved. Police investigations during the period were hampered by multiple active serial killers in the Los Angeles area, collectively referred to under the nickname the South Side Slayer. In 1995, a man named David Allen Jones was wrongfully convicted of 3 murders that later were attributed to Turner. Jones served 11 years in prison before DNA testing cleared him, and he was later awarded compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. Turner's connection to the murders only came to light after his 2002 assault conviction. As part of his sentence, he was required to submit a DNA sample to California's Combined DNA Index system. In September 2003, investigators matched his DNA to evidence from the murders of Paula Vance and Brenda Breeze. By the end of 2004, 10 more unsolved murders had been linked to him through DNA analysis. On December 22, 2004, Turner was formally arraigned on 10 murder charges. He pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors described him as one of the most prolific serial killers in Los Angeles history. His first trial concluded on May 10, 2007, with a conviction for 11 murders. On July 10, 2007, Turner was sentenced to death. In February 2011, he was charged with 4 more murders. He was convicted of those murders on June 19, 2014, and sentenced to death a second time on June 26, 2014. During sentencing, Turner showed little visible emotion. He maintained his innocence, claiming he had been misidentified by DNA evidence. The defense emphasized his unstable childhood and history of substance abuse, but the court found the forensic evidence conclusive. On June 14, 2024, he was additionally charged with the 1998 murder of Atisha Camp in Salt Lake City, Utah, after further evidence linked him to that crime. As of August 2025, Chester Dwayne Turner has spent 23 years in state custody since his 2002 conviction, and 18 years on death row at San Quentin Rehabilitation Center in Marin County, California. He was 20 years old at the time of his first confirmed murder and 57 at the time of his most recent conviction. He is now 58 years old. Number 3. Wesley Howard Shermantine, Jr. On November 14, 1998, in Clements, California, 25-year-old Cindy Vanderheiden disappeared after leaving the Linden Inn bar with 2 men she knew from town, Wesley Howard Shermantine, Jr., and his longtime friend Lauren Joseph Herzog. She was never seen alive again. Her disappearance led to an investigation that eventually exposed the pair as perpetrators of a series of murders across San Joaquin and Calaveras counties. A series that became associated with the name Speed Freak Killers because of their addiction to hard substance. Wesley Howard Shermantine, Jr. was born in Linden, California. He grew up on the same street as Lauren Herzog. Both men spent much of their childhood together because there were few children in their rural neighborhood. Wesley's father was a successful contractor and real estate developer who provided his son with money, vehicles, and hunting equipment. Sherman graduated from Linden High School in 1984, where he and Herzog were known for drinking, substance use, and bullying other students. The two frequently used hard substances and spent much of their early adulthood together in Stockton, California. Sherman and Herzog's crimes spanned more than a decade. On November 27, 1984, 35-year-old Howard King and 31-year-old Paul Cavanaugh were shot to death in their car on Roberts Island, southwest of Stockton. The tire tracks at the scene were later matched to Sherman's red pickup truck. Earlier that same year, in September, 41-year-old Henry Howell was found dead near Hope Valley in Alpine County. He had been shot and struck in the head with a blunt object. Witnesses later placed Sherman and Herzog in the area at the time of the murder. In September 1985, 24-year-old Robin Armtrout was found brutally attacked with a knife more than a dozen times near Potter Creek close to Linden. That October, 16-year-old Chevelle Chevy Wheeler vanished after leaving Franklin High School in Stockton. She had told a friend she was going with Wes to a family cabin. She never returned. Investigators later found her blood and hair inside a cabin owned by the Sherman family. In the years that followed, more women disappeared from Stockton and nearby towns, including Kimberly Billy, 19, and Joanne Hobson, 16, whose remains were later recovered from an abandoned well in Linden. The disappearance of Cindy Vanderheiden in 1998 triggered the case that broke the pattern of unsolved murders. When Sherman's car was repossessed in January 1999, blood belonging to Vanderheiden was discovered inside. Investigators focused on Herzog, who was extensively questioned and gave details implicating Sherman in several murders, including those of Howell, King, Cavanaugh, and Armtrout. On March 17, 1999, both men were arrested by the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Department. At trial in 2001, a jury found Wesley Sherman guilty of 4 murders. Testimony was presented from women who described sexual assaults, kidnappings, and threats committed by him. His ex-wife and his sister recounted years of physical abuse, including while pregnant. Sherman was sentenced to death. Loren Herzog was convicted in the same year of 3 murders and an accessory charge, receiving a 78-year sentence. In 2004, an appeals court overturned most of Herzog's convictions, ruling his confessions had been coerced. He later accepted a plea bargain for lesser charges and was released after serving 11 years. His parole in 2010 drew widespread opposition, and he was housed in a trailer outside High Desert State Prison in Susanville. In January 2012, Herzog died by wounds inside his trailer after learning that Sherman was cooperating with authorities. While on death row, Sherman wrote letters disclosing burial sites. In 2010, his sister turned over letters describing an abandoned well in Linden. In 2012, after bounty hunter Leonard Padilla offered him payment, Sherman drew maps leading to multiple burial sites. Excavations of wells and former family property in Linden and Calaveras County yielded thousands of bone fragments. Identified victims included Joanne Hobson, Kimberly Billy, Cindy Vanderheiden, and Chevelle Wheeler. Additional remains were also found, but not all were identified. Sherman claimed in letters that as many as 72 people had been murdered, but he placed responsibility on Herzog for many of the deaths. Sherman continued to insist that Herzog was the primary perpetrator. He denied full culpability, often stating that he was present but not directly responsible. He accepted money in exchange for directions to burial sites, and in some cases his information was either incomplete or misleading. Victims' families expressed frustration at the dependence on Sherman's cooperation to recover remains. After the confessions, he has filed appeals but has not succeeded in overturning his conviction. As of August 2025, Wesley Howard Sherman Tyne Jr. has served 26 years in prison since his arrest in 1999. He is 59 years old and remains incarcerated under a death sentence. Number 4. Ramon Bojorquez Salcido murdered 7 people, including members of his family and a co-worker at his place of employment. The murders occurred across several locations in Sonoma and Cotati. His wife, 2 of his 3 daughters, his mother-in-law, 2 of her daughters, and his winery supervisor were among the victims. Ramon Bojorquez Salcido was 28 years old at the time. He was born in Mexico. At the age of 18, he married a young woman in his hometown who left him shortly afterward to return to her child's biological father. By 1980, he moved to Kern County, California, where he married a second time. That marriage produced a child but later ended, and he failed to pay child support. In the mid-1980s, he married Angela Richards, who was raised in a devout Catholic household. Together they had 3 daughters, Sophia, Carmina, and Teresa. Ramon was known for drinking heavily and using cocaine. By 1987, he had found steady work at the Grand Cru Vineyard in Sonoma County, where he worked on the bottling line. His supervisors included Tracy Tuvey and Kenneth Booty. On the night of April 13, 1989, Salcido consumed hard substance and alcohol with acquaintances. In the early morning hours of April 14th, he drove his daughters 4-year-old Sophia, 3-year-old Carmina, and 22-month-old Teresa to a secluded quarry dump site. There, he used a knife to slash them. Sophia and Teresa died from their wounds, while Carmina, despite a severe cut across her neck, remained alive for more than 30 hours until discovered by quarry workers. From the quarry, Salcido drove to Cotati, where his mother-in-law Marion Louise Richards lived with her 2 younger daughters, Ruth and Maria. Inside their home, he fatally attacked all 3 with a knife. Marion, aged 47, died from a head wound and a cut to the throat. 12-year-old Ruth and 8-year-old Maria both died from slash wounds across their necks. Their bodies were found later that morning. After leaving the Richards home, Salcido returned to his residence in Boys Hot Springs. His wife Angela was there with their youngest daughter. Salcido shot Angela multiple times, murdering her inside the hallway of their home. Salcido then went to the Grand Cru Winery, where he confronted his supervisor, 35-year-old Tracy Tuvey. He shot and murdered him in the driveway of the vineyard. Shortly afterward, he drove to the residence of another supervisor, Kenneth Booty, and shot him, but Booty survived with injuries. Salcido then fled Sonoma County. Later that day, law enforcement discovered the multiple crime scenes. The surviving child, Carmina, was found sitting beside the bodies of her sisters with her throat cut. She told emergency personnel, "Daddy cut me." She was transported to a hospital and survived her injuries. Salcido fled California by driving south. He crossed the border at Calexico and traveled to Guasave, Sinaloa, Mexico, where he was arrested on April 19, 1989, by Mexican authorities. During questioning, he stated that he had murdered his family because he believed his wife was sleeping around with his supervisor. On October 30, 1990, a jury convicted him of 6 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 2 counts of attempted murder. The defense argued that his use of alcohol and cocaine placed him in a state of psychotic attack and requested that the charges be reduced to second-degree murder or manslaughter. The jury rejected this argument. On November 16, 1990, Ramon Salcido was sentenced to death. After sentencing, Salcido was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he has remained on death row. He later became active in religious activities within the prison, describing himself as a Christian minister. He attributed his survival and spiritual conversion to an encounter with another prisoner who gave him a Bible. In the years since his conviction, Salcido has pursued appeals through the California Supreme Court and federal courts. His death sentence has been upheld, and no retrial has been granted. Survivor Carmina Salcido, who was 3 years old at the time of the crimes, has spoken publicly in adulthood about her recovery and her estrangement from her father. She has stated that she does not forgive him. As of August 2025, Ramon Bojorquez Salcido has served 36 years in prison since his arrest in 1989. He is 64 years old. Number 5. David Allen Rayleigh. On February 2, 1985, in Hillsborough, San Mateo County, California, David Allen Rayleigh attacked 2 teenage girls inside the Carolans mansion, a large, unoccupied estate where he was working as a security guard. The incident resulted in the death of 16-year-old Janine Grinsell and the attempted murder of 17-year-old Laurie McKenna. David Allen Rayleigh was 23 years old at the time. He grew up in the Bay Area of California. Rayleigh had a history of juvenile offenses, including lewd acts with minors during his teenage years. By adulthood, he worked irregular jobs before finding employment as a night security guard at Carolans, a mansion built in 1914 that had been unoccupied since the 1970s. While the property was closed to the public, Rayleigh gained a reputation for giving unauthorized tours, especially to young women, sometimes making comments about violence or soundproof rooms. He once remarked to a visitor that he could murder someone in the basement and no one would hear. On the morning of February 2, 1985, a local journalism student interviewed Rayleigh for a feature about Carolans. He told her that young women often offered him favors to gain entry. Later that day, Laurie McKenna and Janine Grinsell, who had heard about the possibility of private tours, arrived at the estate. Rayleigh agreed to show them inside but asked that they park their car where it would not be seen. During the tour, he suggested that guards sometimes received sexual favors in exchange for entry. Afterward, he led the girls to a basement safe, telling them police dogs were nearby and that they needed to hide. Although he initially promised not to shut the door, he confined them and refused to let them out until they undressed to their underwear. Over the next several hours, Rayleigh assaulted, beat, and attacked both girls with a knife. He bound Grinsell with rope and rolled McKenna inside a carpet, then placed both in the trunk of his 1973 Plymouth. At the time, his shift at the mansion was due to end. He stayed on until his supervisor arrived around 5:15 in the afternoon. After leaving, he drove the girls to his home in San Jose, where he briefly let them out of the trunk in the garage. McKenna begged him to take them to a hospital and promised not to tell anyone, but he forced them back inside when family members arrived home. That evening, while his father and sister were in the house, he played a board game with his sister and later told his father he had cleaned the garage. Near midnight, he moved the car across the street, then drove the girls to a remote ravine off Silver Creek Road. There he beat them again and left them in the dump site during cold, wet conditions. At daybreak, McKenna managed to climb out of the ravine despite severe injuries. After several cars passed without stopping, a pickup truck driver eventually stopped and brought help. McKenna identified Rayleigh as the attacker. Both girls were transported to Santa Teresa Hospital. Grinsell, who had been attacked with a knife 41 times, suffered massive blood loss, shock, and hypothermia. Despite treatment, she died at 11:35 in the morning. Rayleigh was arrested on the evening of February 3, 1985, and charged with 1 count of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault with special circumstances, making him eligible for the death penalty. His trial began in March 1987 after 2 months of jury selection. During the proceedings, the defense argued that others also gave tours of the mansion and suggested that Grinsell's death was primarily caused by hypothermia. The prosecution emphasized the deliberate confinement, assault, and violence. On April 22, 1987, Rayleigh was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and kidnapping. On May 17, 1988, the jury sentenced Rayleigh to death. The prosecution presented evidence of prior misconduct from his juvenile record. Rayleigh displayed little visible emotion at sentencing and did not make a statement. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. In 2013, Rayleigh's lawyers argued that he was autistic and intellectually disabled, citing precedents that barred execution in such cases. Rayleigh opposed this defense, attempting to fire his attorneys. The petition was rejected and his sentence remained unchanged. With executions in California suspended after 2006 due to concerns about lethal injection procedures, Rayleigh has remained on death row. As of August 2025, David Allen Rayleigh has served 40 years in prison since his arrest in 1985. He is 63 years old, with no scheduled release or execution date. Number 6. Gerald Parker. On December 1, 1978, in Anaheim, California, 17-year-old Sandra Fry was found beaten inside her apartment. She had been struck repeatedly with a blunt piece of wood and left with fatal injuries. This marked the first murders in a series of attacks carried out by Gerald Parker, a 23-year-old United States Marine stationed in Orange County. Over the following year, he would assault and murder multiple women, all within their homes, before being identified years later as the man responsible. Gerald Parker was born in Phoenix, Arizona. His early childhood was marked by instability. When he was 8 years old, his mother, Frankie Wagner Parker, died during childbirth, and his father abandoned the family. He lived briefly with his grandmother before being placed in juvenile hall for substance abuse. Later, he resided with relatives and spent extended periods at Boys Republic, a private school for troubled boys. He was known to abuse substances and alcohol from a young age, reporting years later that he inhaled glue, paint, and solvents between the ages of 7 and 15. He began using marijuana at 11, experimented with hallucinogens, and frequently drank heavily. In 1973, Parker enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He trained in San Diego and Camp Pendleton before being stationed at Adak Naval Air Facility in Alaska, later transferring to North Carolina, Mississippi, and then Tustin, California. By 1979, he held the rank of Staff Sergeant at El Toro Marine Corps Air Station. His military career ended in 1980 when he was dishonorably discharged following a felony conviction for sexual misconduct. The crimes attributed to Parker began on December 1, 1978. In Anaheim, he entered the apartment of 17-year-old Sandra Fry through an open bedroom window, carrying a 2x4 piece of wood. He struck her several times and attempted to sexually assault her. Fry later died of her injuries. On April 1, 1979, in Costa Mesa, he entered the apartment of 21-year-old Kimberly Rollins through an unlocked door. Using the same method, he beat her with a wooden board, leaving her dead when her roommate discovered her. On September 15, 1979, 31-year-old Marilyn Carlton was attacked in Costa Mesa. Parker entered through an unlocked sliding glass door and beat her during an attempted assault. She died the following day from her injuries, though her 9-year-old son witnessed the attack and later described the assailant to police. On September 30, 1979, Parker attacked 20-year-old nurse Diana Green in Tustin. She was 9 months pregnant at the time. He struck her on the head with a blunt object and assaulted her while she was unconscious. Green survived after 10 days in a coma, though she suffered amnesia. Her unborn child, Chantal Marie Green, was delivered stillborn. Police wrongly arrested her husband, Kevin Green, who was convicted and sentenced to life in prison based on her testimony. He served 16 years before Parker's eventual confession and DNA evidence exonerated him. On October 6, 1979, Parker entered the apartment of 24-year-old Deborah Kennedy in Tustin. He used a mallet to strike her as she slept, abusing her and causing fatal brain injuries. 2 weeks later, on October 20, 1979, he murdered 17-year-old Deborah Lynn Sr. in her Huntington Beach apartment. He entered through a bathroom window, left a palm print, and assaulted and murdered her. In addition to the murders, Parker committed several non-fatal assaults. In July 1979, he attacked 24-year-old Jane Pettengill in Costa Mesa, leaving her in a coma with a permanent tracheotomy. On February 2, 1980, he beat Aida Demirjian in her apartment garage with a metal pipe before being interrupted by witnesses and arrested. He was convicted of robbery and assault in that case and sentenced to prison. 2 weeks later, he kidnapped and assaulted 13-year-old Paula S. in Tustin. She survived and reported the attack, and Parker was convicted of kidnapping and assault, receiving a 6-year sentence. In 1984, while serving time at the California Correctional Institution, Parker attacked his cellmate with a steel bar, resulting in another conviction for assault with a deadly weapon. Though known in the area as the Bludgeon Killer, Parker was not linked to the earlier murders until 1996. That year, DNA evidence from preserved assault kits and autopsy samples matched him while he was already in custody for assault. During questioning, he confessed to 6 murders and multiple. He admitted responsibility for the attack on Diana Green, which led to the wrongful conviction of her husband, Kevin Green. Green was exonerated and released after serving 16 years in prison. In June 1996, Parker was charged with 6 murders. He could not be charged with some assault due to statutes of limitations. His trial began in October 1998. After only 2 hours of jury deliberation, he was convicted on 6 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. In November 1998, during the sentencing phase, Parker accepted responsibility and stated that if his death brought closure to victims' families, it was deserved. The jury recommended the death penalty, and he was sentenced to death on November 12, 1998. As of August 2025, Gerald Parker has served nearly 27 years on death row. He remains eligible for execution if procedures are reinstated. Number 7. Joseph Naso. On January 10, 1977, the body of 18-year-old Roxine Ragesh was discovered on a roadside near Fairfax, California. She had been choked to death and left partially hidden in the underbrush. This murder marked the beginning of a series of murders later attributed to Joseph Naso, an American photographer whose crimes spanned nearly 2 decades across California and Nevada. Joseph Naso was born on January 7, 1934, in Rochester, New York. He grew up in the city before serving in the United States Air Force in the 1950s. After leaving the service, he married Judith, and their marriage lasted 18 years. They had 1 son, Charles, who was later diagnosed with schizophrenia, and Naso spent his later years providing some care for him. Following his divorce, Naso continued to visit his ex-wife in the San Francisco Bay Area, where he spent much of his life. He lived at different times in Oakland, San Francisco, Piedmont, Sacramento, Yuba City, and later Reno, Nevada. He took classes at community colleges and worked as a freelance photographer, supplementing his income with odd jobs. Throughout his life, he was arrested repeatedly for petty theft, including incidents of shoplifting in the 1990s and 2000s. Acquaintances referred to him as Crazy Joe, a man with odd behavior and a quick temper. For the numerous murders he committed, the confirmed victims began with Roxine Ragesh. On August 13, 1978, 22-year-old Carmen Lorraine Colon was found along Carquinez Scenic Highway between Crockett and Port Costa, Her body decomposed after being dumped on the roadside. Investigators initially suspected she had been a high-road street worker, though her family disputed this characterization. In January 1981, the body of 56-year-old Sherilia Patton washed ashore near the Naval Net Depot in Tiburon. At the time she had been searching for work in the Bay Area. Naso managed the building where she had lived and had also photographed her, but he was not charged despite suspicion at the time. In May 1992, a woman known as Sarah Dillon, born Renee Shapiro, who had renamed herself after the wife of singer Bob Dylan, was last seen near the Warfield Theater in San Francisco. She disappeared en route to a concert and was later determined to have been murdered in or near Nevada County. On September 19, 1993, 38-year-old waitress Pamela Ruth Parsons was found choked to death in Yuba County. She lived near Cooper Avenue in Yuba City, the same neighborhood where Naso resided. On August 14, 1994, 31-year-old Tracy Lynn Tafoya was discovered dead near Marysville Cemetery. She had been intoxicated, assaulted, choked, and left in a rural area. Investigators later considered whether Naso might be connected to other unsolved murders. In 1983, the headless remains of an unidentified woman, later known as the Sonoma County Jane Doe, were found near a winery in Healdsburg. A diary entry in Naso's possession referred to a girl in Healdsburg, raising suspicions of his involvement, though no charges followed. Authorities also investigated whether he could be tied to the Rochester Alphabet murders, which occurred in the 1970s in his hometown. 4 of Naso's known victims shared double initials in their names, but DNA evidence ruled him out as a match in the Rochester cases. The turning point came in April 2010, when Nevada parole officers carried out a home inspection at Naso's residence in Reno after a probation violation for shoplifting. Inside, they discovered a handwritten diary. The journal contained lists of 10 unnamed women with accompanying details of assaults. They also found thousands of photographs of women in lingerie, some posed to appear unconscious or deceased, and mannequin parts arranged with the bodies. Many of these photographs dated back decades. He was arrested, and on April 11, 2011, Naso was formally charged with the murders of Rogish, Colon, Parsons, and Tafoya. The trial took place in Marin County. Naso chose to represent himself for parts of the proceedings, speaking directly to the jury. On August 20, 2013, he was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder. On November 22, 2013, Naso was sentenced to death. During sentencing, he denied responsibility, telling the court he was innocent and had been framed by circumstance. As of August 2025, Joseph Naso has served 12 years on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. Number 8. Andrew Hampton Mickle. On November 19, 2002, at 1:27 in the morning, Officer David Mobilio of the Red Bluff Police Department in California stopped to refuel his marked patrol car at a local gas station on Main Street. Mobilio, 31 years old, was alone, working the night shift. As he stood beside the vehicle, he was ambushed. He was shot twice in the back and once in the head at very close range. His service weapon remained holstered. A handmade flag displaying the words, "Don't tread on us," was left near his body. No witnesses saw the shooting, and the scene bore the signs of a carefully planned attack. The assailant was later identified as Andrew Hampton Mickle, a resident of Springfield, Ohio. He graduated from Springfield's North High School in 1998. A strong and academically gifted teenager, he participated in drama and school activities, but was described as restless and dissatisfied with routine education. After graduation, he enlisted in the United States Army, serving 3 years with the 101st Airborne Division, where he rose to the rank of specialist. He left the military honorably and later enrolled at Evergreen State College in Washington, a liberal arts school that encouraged independent study. At Evergreen, Mikkel became involved in political activism, human rights work, and independent journalism with indiemedia.org. Friends recalled him as intelligent but deeply troubled, struggling with depression and holding increasingly radical anti-government beliefs. 6 days after the murder of Officer Mobilio, messages appeared online across several indie media websites. In these postings, signed Andy McCrae, Mikkel admitted responsibility. He wrote that the act was a protest against police state tactics and corporate irresponsibility. He explained that prior to the attack, he had formed a legal corporation named Proud and Insolent Youth Incorporated, intended, in his words, to use corporate immunity to destroy what he viewed as corrupt systems. The chosen name was drawn from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. In his writing, he presented the murder as part of a broader revolt, framing it as a political action rather than a personal crime. Following the postings, Mikkel traveled to New Hampshire. He checked into a hotel near the state capitol in Concord. He contacted his parents, Stan and Karen Mikkel, both educators, and confessed his crime. They alerted authorities, leading to his arrest on November 23, 2002. Surrounded by law enforcement, he requested to speak with a local reporter before surrendering. During that conversation, he repeated his admission, framing it as an act of resistance. He was then taken into custody without incident and extradited to California. The trial was moved to Colusa County to avoid the publicity surrounding Red Bluff. Mikkel insisted on representing himself. At times he delivered statements to the jury, declaring openly that he had murdered Officer Mobilio and describing it as an ambush. He presented political writings and held up a two-colored ball to illustrate his belief that the jury was only seeing one side of the story. His parents, who had urged psychiatric evaluation, compared his situation to that of Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber. They stated their belief that their son suffered from mental illness, but Mikkel rejected such claims and maintained that his actions were deliberate and rational. In April 2005, after weeks of testimony, Mikkel was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances for the killing of a peace officer in the line of duty. The jury also considered his online writings as evidence of premeditation and intent. During sentencing proceedings, Mikkel continued to speak for himself. He showed no remorse and described himself as a political prisoner. On April 21, 2005, he was sentenced to death. His discharge from the force was not applicable, as he had not been an officer, but the impact of his actions on law enforcement was a central focus at sentencing. Officer Mobilio's widow and colleagues spoke in court about their loss. After sentencing, Mikkel was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he entered death row. As of August 2025, Andrew Hampton Mikkel has served 20 years on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. He was 23 years old at the time of the crime. He is now 46 years old and remains incarcerated under a sentence of death. Number 9. Charles Ray Chase Merritt. On February 4, 2010, in Fallbrook, California, Joseph McStay, his wife Summer, and their 2 sons, 4-year-old Gianni and 3-year-old Joseph Jr., vanished from their home. Their disappearance was reported on February 15, when Joseph's brother Michael entered the residence through an open window and discovered an abandoned household with no sign of the family. 2 dogs were left unattended in the backyard, food was left uneaten in the kitchen, and 2 bowls of popcorn sat on the living room sofa. Days earlier, on February 8, the family's Isuzu Trooper had been towed from a parking lot near the Mexican border. For years, there were no clear answers. Charles Ray Merritt, known as Chase, was eventually identified as the perpetrator. Merritt, born in 1957, had a history of burglary, theft, and financial troubles. By 2001, he had pleaded no contest to burglary and grand theft, serving 6 months in jail. He worked with Joseph McStay through McStay's business, Earth-Inspired Products, which designed decorative water fountains. Merritt, older than Joseph by over 20 years, had come to rely on him financially. Records showed that Merritt accumulated gambling debts and more than $20,000 in unpaid taxes. Tensions arose within the business, with Joseph considering severing ties. On the evening of February 4th at 8:28 p.m., Joseph's cell phone placed a call to Merritt, but it went unanswered. That was the last known communication from Joseph. Investigators believe that shortly afterward, inside the Fallbrook home, Merritt attacked the family with a 3-pound sledgehammer. Prosecutors argued that financial desperation was his motive, citing more than $21,000 in checks Merritt wrote on Joseph's business account in the days following the disappearance. Evidence later revealed that Merritt's cell phone had pinged a tower near the desert gravesite on February 6, 2010. The family remained missing until November 11, 2013, when a motorcyclist discovered 2 shallow graves in the Mojave Desert near Victorville, more than 100 miles from the McStay residence. Inside were the skeletal remains of Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr. A rusted sledgehammer was found buried with Summer and her youngest son. Autopsies concluded all 4 victims died of blunt force trauma. The case, unsolved for nearly 4 years, was now classified as a homicide. On November 5, 2014, detectives from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department arrested Merritt after linking his DNA to the family's vehicle and financial records. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The district attorney sought the death penalty. Merritt, who initially proclaimed his innocence, gave conflicting interviews. He alternated between professing closeness to Joseph and criticizing Summer. He told reporters he had passed a polygraph test and insisted he knew nothing about the family's disappearance. The trial began on January 7, 2019, after multiple delays caused by Merritt firing or attempting to replace his attorneys. During proceedings, prosecutors described Merritt as motivated by greed and fraud, arguing that he murdered Joseph to conceal theft and prevent being cut off from business funds. Jurors were shown images of the desert graves and heard testimony about Merritt's gambling and financial record. Defense attorneys suggested that another business partner, Daniel Kavanaugh, may have been responsible, but the prosecution emphasized Merritt's proximity, financial activity, and DNA evidence. On June 10, 2019, the jury found Charles Chase Merritt guilty on all 4 counts of murder, and they recommended the death penalty. Merritt maintained his innocence throughout the sentencing. He addressed the court directly, claiming he was framed and stating that he loved Joseph and would never harm him or his family. His words included, "I did not do this thing. I know you don't believe me." He criticized prosecutors and accused the court of misconduct. After sentencing, Merritt was transferred to death row at San Quentin State Prison, where he remains under California's death penalty moratorium. As of August 2025, Charles Ray Chase Merritt has served 5 years on death row. He was 52 years old at the time of the killings and 66 years old at sentencing. Number 10. Gunnar J. Lindbergh. On January 28, 1996, in Tustin, California, 24-year-old Thien Minh Lee left his home to rollerblade at the tennis courts of Tustin High School. That same evening, Gunnar J. Lindbergh and his accomplice, 17-year-old Domenic Michael Christopher, were driving in the area after celebrating the Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl victory earlier that day. Lindbergh expressed that he wanted to attack someone of Asian descent. The 2 men encountered Lee alone on the courts and moved toward him. Lindbergh approached Lai directly, with Christopher nearby, and initiated the assault by striking him. Lai attempted to speak, offering his possessions in an effort to defuse the situation, but Lindbergh produced a knife. Over the course of several minutes, Lindbergh beat and attacked Lai repeatedly with a knife, while Christopher urged him on. Lai suffered approximately 22 stab wounds, including deep injuries to his chest, abdomen, and back, as well as 2 slashes across his neck. 14 wounds penetrated his vital organs. The injuries caused catastrophic internal bleeding, and Lai died on the court. The next morning, at approximately 7:45 a.m., Tustin High School groundskeeper Frank Armenta discovered Lai's body and notified school staff to call police. Officers arrived to find Lai deceased, with a cap and a key nearby that were later traced to his residence. The brutality of the injuries indicated a prolonged attack with a bladed weapon. Investigators began searching for suspects. Within weeks, police received a letter written by Lindbergh to his cousin, Walter Ray Dulaney IV, in which Lindbergh admitted to the killing. In the letter, he detailed the sequence of events, describing the knife attack, and expressed that the act gave him a feeling stronger than hard substance use. He also admitted his motive was racial, consistent with his associations with white supremacist groups. Dulaney turned the letter over to police, and further communications confirmed Lindbergh's involvement. On March 2, 1996, officers executed a search warrant at Lindbergh's apartment in Tustin. Lindbergh was taken into custody, along with Christopher. Inside the apartment, police recovered white supremacist literature, writings referencing violence, and clothing with traces of blood. Posters and items in the apartment depicted racist imagery. Christopher was later tried as a juvenile and convicted separately. Lindbergh was charged with first-degree murder, attempted robbery, and a hate crime enhancement. The prosecution presented evidence of Lindbergh's violent past, including a 1992 incident when he shot an 11-year-old boy 3 times with a pellet gun, striking an artery in the child's heart, as well as robberies and assaults committed as a teenager. Witnesses, including jailhouse acquaintances, testified about Lindbergh's stated hatred for Asian people and his boasts about the Tustin murder. At trial in Orange County, Chief Deputy District Attorney Mike Jacobs argued that the murder was premeditated, racially motivated, and carried out with exceptional cruelty. Lindbergh's defense did not deny his presence at the crime scene but attempted to minimize the hate crime aspect. In 1997, the jury found Lindbergh guilty of the murder of Thien Minh Lee, as well as the hate crime and robbery enhancements, and he was sentenced to death. As of August 2025, Gunnar J. Lindbergh has served 28 years in prison since his 1997 death sentence. He was 20 years old at the time of the murder and is now 50 years old. Number 11. Randy Stephen Kraft. On May 14, 1983, at approximately 1:40 a.m., California Highway Patrol officers stopped a 1979 Toyota Celica on Interstate 5 in Mission Viejo, Orange County. The driver, 38-year-old Randy Stephen Kraft, had been weaving across lanes. When officers approached, they discovered the body of 25-year-old United States Marine Terry Gambrell slumped in the passenger seat. Gambrell had been choked with his own belt and showed evidence of being intoxicated and assaulted. Kraft was arrested on suspicion of murder at the scene, marking the end of a murder spree that had spanned more than a decade. Randy Stephen Kraft was born in Long Beach, California. He was described during his early years as intelligent and hard-working. By adolescence, he excelled academically, graduating in the top 10 of his high school class. At Claremont Men's College, he studied economics, briefly aligned with conservative politics, then became involved in Democratic campaigns. During his college years, Kraft began to acknowledge his homosexuality, which he had previously kept hidden. He graduated in 1968 and soon enlisted in the United States Air Force, where he rose to the rank of Airman First Class. In July 1969, he disclosed his sexual orientation to his superiors and was subsequently discharged on medical grounds, a dismissal he attempted unsuccessfully to challenge. Afterward, he returned to Orange County, working in various jobs while maintaining long-term relationships with male partners. Kraft's first known assault occurred in March 1970, when 13-year-old Joseph Fancher was lured to Kraft's apartment in Belmont Shore. Fancher was intoxicated and assaulted but managed to escape. No charges were filed due to lack of corroborating evidence. By October 1971, Kraft was suspected in the death of Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender whose body was found near Ortega Highway. Although the cause of death was listed as alcohol poisoning, investigators later suspected Duquette was Kraft's first victim, referenced as stable on a cryptic scorecard recovered years later. Throughout the 1970s and into the early 1980s, young men between the ages of 14 and 30 disappeared across California and Oregon. Many were Marines or hitchhikers whom Kraft encountered near bars, bus stops, or along freeways. The victims were typically intoxicated with sedatives or alcohol, bound, and subjected to torture that included burns, mutilation, or insertion of foreign objects before being murdered by strangulation, asphyxiation, or poisoning. Their bodies were often dumped along highways. Among those identified were Edward Daniel Moore, a 20-year-old Marine last seen leaving Camp Pendleton in 1972, and Vincent Cruz Mestis, a 23-year-old art student whose body was found mutilated in the San Bernardino Mountains in 1973. Similar cases accumulated across Los Angeles, Orange, and Riverside counties. On March 29, 1975, Kraft picked up 17-year-old Keith Crotwell and a companion in Long Beach. Crotwell's remains were discovered weeks later. Although questioned, Kraft was not charged due to inconclusive evidence. Over time, at least 16 murders were conclusively linked to him, though investigators suspected more than 60. A coded ledger of 61 entries, referred to as a scorecard, was found in Kraft's car during his 1983 arrest, each entry believed to correspond to a victim. The investigation culminated in Orange County, where Kraft was charged with 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of assault. The trial began in September 1988 and lasted 13 months, making it one of the longest and most expensive trials in California history at that time. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, testimony from surviving witnesses, photographs recovered from Kraft's residence, and the handwritten scorecard. Defense counsel argued the evidence was circumstantial and that Kraft was being unfairly linked to murders possibly committed by others, noting the existence of other offenders in the region, sometimes referred to as freeway killers. On May 5, 1989, the jury found Randy Stephen Kraft guilty on 16 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of assault. The penalty phase concluded with a sentence of death. During sentencing, Kraft remained composed and did not display visible emotion. He maintained his innocence, stating he was not responsible for the murders attributed to him. He has consistently denied involvement throughout his incarceration. As of August 2025, Randy Stephen Kraft has served 42 years in prison since his arrest in 1983, and 36 years since his death sentence in 1989. He was 38 years old at the time of his arrest, and is now 80 years old. Number 12. Anand John Alexander. On March 6, 2007, Anand John Alexander was arrested in Beverly Hills, California, after allegations were made that he had assaulted multiple young women and girls who had approached him seeking modeling opportunities. At the time of his arrest, he was 33 years old and an internationally known fashion designer with clients and associations that included Paris Hilton, Ivanka Trump, and Tyra Banks. The Los Angeles Police Department alleged that Alexander had lured women, many of them aspiring models, into his residence and used the pretense of casting calls to commit intimate acts and sexual assault. He was charged with multiple counts of assault, battery, unlawful conduct with a minor, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. Anand John Alexander was born in Kerala, India, and as a teenager he pursued studies in art and design. At 16 years old, he received a scholarship to the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale in Florida and later enrolled at Parsons the New School for Design in New York, where he transitioned from fine arts to fashion. During the late 1990s, he founded his own fashion label and presented collections in New York, Los Angeles, and international fashion weeks. His work combined Indian motifs with contemporary Western styles. He was sponsored at various points by Giorgio Armani and credited designers such as Gianni Versace as early influences. By the early 2000s, he had become known in celebrity circles, with his designs worn by Michelle Rodriguez, Amanda Hearst, Lydia Hearst, and members of the Hilton family. In 2006, he founded Genesis Fashion Incorporated and attracted investment capital, further raising his profile. The accusations that led to his arrest originated from women between the ages of 14 and 21, who claimed that Alexander had promised them modeling jobs. Prosecutors alleged that after gaining their trust, he isolated them, offered alcohol or substances, and then committed assaults. Alexander denied the charges, maintaining that any sexual contact was consensual and that one minor involved had misrepresented her age. He pleaded not guilty to all charges in California. On November 13, 2008, after a trial in Los Angeles County Superior Court that lasted several months, a jury convicted Alexander on one count of assault of an adult woman, as well as 15 additional counts, unlawful conduct, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. He was acquitted of several other counts. During sentencing proceedings in August 2009, Alexander dismissed his defense attorneys, stating that he believed they had been compromised. He represented himself and argued that there had been misconduct during the trial, including the conduct of juror number 12, who had improper communications with his sister Sanjana John during deliberations. Despite his claims, the presiding judge denied his request for a new trial. On August 31, 2009, he was sentenced to 59 years to life in state prison. Alexander remained composed during the sentencing but reiterated that he was the victim of conspiracy and prejudice. He stated that his cultural background had been used against him during trial, with the prosecutor allegedly portraying him as an outsider who exploited American women. Following his sentencing, Alexander and his defense team pursued numerous appeals, but California Supreme Court has upheld his conviction, but federal appeals remain ongoing. In 2023, he was selected for the California State University Huck's Master's Degree Program for incarcerated students. Reports from advocacy groups describe him as continuing to work on appeals and maintaining that his conviction was unjust. In his own words, he has stated that what I did was immoral but not illegal, asserting that the justice system targeted him because of his race and visibility. As of August 2025, Anand John Alexander has served 18 years in custody since his arrest. Number 13. Ryan James Hoyt. On August 9, 2000, in the Santa Ynez Mountains outside Santa Barbara, California, Ryan James Hoyt murdered 15-year-old Nicholas Samuel Markowitz. Hoyt, who was 20 years old at the time, carried out the murder under the direction of Jesse James Hollywood, a small-time substance dealer and associate whom Hoyt owed money. The murder was the final act of a series of events that began 3 days earlier with the abduction of Nicholas Markowitz. Ryan James Hoyt was born on August 10, 1979, By his late teenage years, he struggled with substance use and instability. Friends and witnesses later described him as insecure, troubled, and dependent on others for validation. He associated with Jesse James Hollywood and others in a circle that revolved around drugs, parties, and petty criminal activity. Hoyt often did odd jobs for Hollywood and fell into debt with him, which prosecutors later established as the motive behind his role in the murder. On August 6, 2000, Jesse James Hollywood, Jesse Ruggie, and William Skidmore encountered Nicholas Markowitz in West Hills, Los Angeles. Nicholas was the younger half-brother of Ben Markowitz, who owed Hollywood money for substance transactions. Hollywood and his associates abducted Nicholas in broad daylight, placing him in a van. Witnesses observed the abduction, but at the time it was not understood to be connected to a larger crime. For 3 days, Nicholas was held at various locations in Santa Barbara County, including the homes of acquaintances who were told he was just hanging out. He appeared unaware of the seriousness of his situation. During this period, Hollywood considered his options. He feared that holding Nicholas could expose him to a potential life sentence for kidnapping and extortion if authorities learned the details. On August 8, he instructed Ryan Hoyt to murder Nicholas as a way of resolving the situation and as repayment for Hoyt's substance debt. That evening, Jesse Ruggie and Graham Presley helped prepare a shallow grave in the mountains outside Santa Barbara. On the morning of August 9th, Hoyt, Ruggie, and Presley drove Nicholas to the site. Witnesses later testified that Nicholas was cooperative, believing he was being taken home. At the grave site in the Lizard's Mouth area of the Santa Ynez Mountains, Hoyt struck Nicholas, forcing him into the grave. Using a TEC-9 semi-automatic handgun supplied by Hollywood, Hoyt fired 9 shots into Nicholas and murdered him. The grave was partially covered, and the group left the scene. The body was discovered on August 12 by hikers, and law enforcement quickly connected the crime to Hollywood's circle. Hoyt was arrested shortly afterward. During police interrogation, he confessed in a videotaped interview. At trial, however, he recanted, claiming he had no memory of making such a confession. He testified that his only involvement was handling a duffel bag that he thought contained hard substances, but in fact held the murder weapon. The trial of Ryan Hoyt began in 2001. His defense attorney presented evidence of his troubled background, depression, and avoidant personality disorder. The defense argued that his role had been exaggerated by prosecutors and that others, including Hollywood, were more responsible for the act. Deputy District Attorney Ron Zonin led the prosecution, emphasizing that Hoyt had multiple opportunities to withdraw, but instead carried out the shooting. In November 2001, Hoyt was convicted of first-degree murder, and the jury recommended a death sentence. The court later found that Hoyt's attorney during the penalty phase had been deficient and that Hoyt's age and mental deficits made him ineligible for execution under evolving standards. His sentence was reduced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Following this ruling, Hoyt was transferred from San Quentin to the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo to serve his sentence. As of August 2025, Ryan James Hoyt has served 25 years in custody since his arrest in August 2000. Number 14. Kevin Bernard Haley. On June 25, 1984, in Los Angeles, California, the body of 56-year-old Laverne Stolze was discovered inside her residence. She had been assaulted and murdered, her death later linked to Kevin Bernard Haley. The crime was one of a series committed by Haley and his older brother, Reginald Haley, during the early 1980s. Kevin Bernard Haley was born in Memphis, Tennessee. He was the younger of 2 brothers, with Reginald born 3 years earlier. In the mid-1960s, the Haley family moved from Tennessee to Los Angeles, California. By the late 1970s, both brothers were engaged in criminal activity. In the early 1980s, Kevin, then in his late teens and early 20s, worked briefly as a dog groomer, but became increasingly consumed by a crack substance addiction. Investigators later concluded that his dependency on substances fueled his participation in violent crimes alongside his brother. Between 1982 and 1984, Kevin Haley and Reginald Haley carried out hundreds of burglaries, multiple sexual assaults, and at least 2 confirmed murders in Los Angeles. Police and prosecutors later suggested that the total number of victims could be higher, possibly as many as 8 homicides and more than 60 assaults. Most of the victims were elderly women living alone, though at least one underage victim, 15-year-old Jody Samuels, was also targeted. On April 20, 1984, 78-year-old Dee Robinoff was assaulted and beaten to death in her home on South Hayworth Avenue. That same day, 90-year-old Isabel Buxton was beaten and murdered inside her home on Andalusia Avenue. On May 12, 15-year-old Jody Samuels was robbed and fatally shot while waiting at a bus stop. On August 4, 88-year-old T. Okauchi was beaten to death in her home on South Manhattan Place. Other women, including Elizabeth Burns and Elizabeth Karp, were also murdered during this period under circumstances consistent with the Haley brothers' methods. On September 28, 1984, Kevin Haley was arrested in Los Angeles on a burglary charge. The following day, 55-year-old Dolores Clement was found assaulted and murdered in her home. Investigators matched fingerprints collected at the crime scene to Kevin Haley. On October 9, he was rearrested and formally charged. He later confessed to multiple burglaries but denied committing murder. In November 1984, Los Angeles Police Chief Darrell Gates described the Haley brothers' crimes as among the most brutal in the city's history. Reginald Haley was tried first and in 1987 convicted of multiple robberies and kidnappings. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Kevin Haley's trial began in May 1988. The prosecution presented his taped confession to the murder of Dolores Clement and fingerprint evidence. The jury convicted him of Clement's assault and murder on June 6, 1988. He was acquitted of the Stolze murder due to insufficient evidence, though he remained the prime suspect. In September 1988, he was sentenced to death. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison and placed on death row. Haley spent 16 years on death row before appealing. In 2004, his attorneys argued that his confession was coerced, that his Miranda rights had been violated, and that the murder of Clement was accidental and should have been treated as manslaughter. While most claims were dismissed, the California Supreme Court overturned his death sentence and ordered a retrial. In August 2004, his conviction was upheld, and at a second trial, he was again sentenced to death. In the early 2010s, DNA testing was performed on evidence from the murder of Laverne Stolze. Results matched Kevin Haley. Prosecutors moved to reopen the case. In 2014, Haley was tried again, this time representing himself. He entered a not guilty plea, declined to present mitigating evidence, and did not deliver a closing argument. The jury found him guilty, and again returned a death verdict. On October 8, 2014, he received another death sentence. Although investigators connected the same firearm used in the murder of Jody Samuels to the shooting of another woman, Wilma Gelber, they were unable to produce the weapon or secure witness identifications sufficient to prosecute Haley for those crimes. As a result, he was never formally charged with either case. Unlike his brother Reginald, who sought parole after decades in custody, Kevin never expressed remorse publicly or requested leniency at his penalty hearings. As of August 2025, Kevin Bernard Haley has served more than 40 years in custody since his arrest in October 1984. He is 61 years old and remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison, incarcerated under a death sentence with no scheduled release date. Number 15. Wayne Adam Ford. On November 2, 1998, at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office in Eureka, California, Wayne Adam Ford arrived with his brother and asked to speak to deputies. From his jacket pocket, he produced a Ziploc bag containing a severed female upper bosom known as the breast. He calmly explained that it belonged to one of several women he had murdered, and he wished to confess before harming anyone else. Everyone at the county was shocked beyond imagination. Wayne Adam Ford was born in Petaluma, California. He was the second son of an American father and a German-born mother. His parents divorced when he was 10 years old. Ford left school early and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, serving 6 years before being honorably discharged in 1985. In 1980, he had been struck by a drunk driver, an accident that left him in a coma for 9 days. Family members and acquaintances later stated that his personality changed significantly afterward. He married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce. He fathered one son with his second wife, and during their separation he became increasingly angry over restricted visitation. He worked for periods as a truck driver and lived in different parts of California and Nevada, eventually settling in Arcata, California, where he lived in a trailer and continued working as a long-haul trucker. Ford's background also included prior legal issues. In 1986, he was accused of robbing and assaulting a high street female worker in Garden Grove, California, though the case did not lead to a long prison sentence. In 1990, he was arrested for animal cruelty in San Clemente and briefly incarcerated. Beginning in the mid-1980s, he experienced worsening psychological difficulties. He was hospitalized several times for psychiatric evaluations and eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Between 1997 and 1998, Ford murdered 4 women. The first confirmed victim, later identified through DNA analysis in June 2023 as 25-year-old Carrie Ann Cummings, disappeared in October 1997. Her dismembered torso was recovered on October 17, 1997, from Ryan Slough near Humboldt Bay, just outside Eureka. Additional body parts were found in different locations, including an arm washed up on a nearby beach, while other remains were never located. On May 16, 1998, Ford murdered 26-year-old Tina Renee Gibbs, a high street female worker from Las Vegas. Her body was discovered on June 2, 1998, in a Kern County aqueduct near Buttonwillow, California. She had been choked to death. On September 25, 1998, he murdered 25-year-old Lynette Dayon White, another high street worker from Fontana, California. Her unclothed body was later found floating in an irrigation canal in San Joaquin County near Lodi. The exact cause of her death could not be determined, though she was believed to have been strangled. In October 1998, Ford murdered his fourth known victim, 29-year-old Patricia Ann Tamez of Victorville, California. Her body was discovered on October 23, 1998, in the California aqueduct near Hesperia. She had been choked and brutally cut across all body. One of her upper body bosom had been removed, which Ford later carried into the sheriff's office when confessing. When questioned after his surrender, Ford told investigators he turned himself in because he feared that his anger toward his estranged wife might cause him to murder her, leaving their son without parents. He described deep shame for his actions, and said his frustration with not being allowed regular access to his child fueled his violence. During interviews lasting several hours, Ford guided investigators to hidden remains, including body parts he had once stored in a freezer inside his trailer and later buried near Trinidad, California. Ford was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. His trial did not begin immediately, as investigators sought to confirm the identities of the victims and gather forensic evidence. During the proceedings, the prosecution presented his confession, physical evidence of body parts, and testimony regarding his psychiatric condition. The defense argued that Ford's mental illness and history of brain injury should be considered in mitigation. On June 27, 2006, after lengthy jury deliberations, Wayne Adam Ford was found guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he was placed on death row. At sentencing, Ford showed little visible emotion. He did not contest the verdict, but his attorneys noted he had expected execution as a consequence of surrendering himself. As of August 2025, Wayne Adam Ford has served 26 years in custody since his arrest. Number 16. Pedro Espinoza. On March 2, 2008, in Arlington Heights, Los Angeles, California, 17-year-old Jamiel Jas Andre Shaw II was walking home from the Beverly Center when he was confronted by 2 men who demanded to know his gang affiliation. One of them, Pedro Espinoza, pulled out a firearm and shot him. Shaw fell to the ground, attempted to shield himself with his hands, and was shot again through his hands and into his face. He was transported to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead at 9:55 that evening. Pedro Espinoza was 18 years old and living in Los Angeles. He was a member of the 18th Street Gang and was in the United States illegally. Espinoza had a history of criminal activity. In November 2007, he was arrested on charges related to firearm possession and assault on a police officer. He served a brief jail term, but on March 1, 2008, he was released from Los Angeles County Jail 4 months early. The next day he murdered Jamiel Shaw. The victim, Jamiel Shaw II, was a standout athlete at Los Angeles High School. He played football, basketball, baseball, and ran track. College recruiters, including from Stanford University and Rutgers University, had expressed interest in him. His mother, Anita Shaw, was serving in the United States Army on active duty in Iraq when her son was murdered. His father, Jamiel Shaw Sr., was at home the night of the murder and heard the gunshots from nearby. He rushed outside and found his son collapsed on the pavement. He remained with him until emergency services arrived. The events leading to the shooting began around 8:40 p.m. Jamiel was carrying a red Spider-Man backpack when Espinoza and an accomplice exited a vehicle and confronted him. Believing the color red and the style of the backpack linked Shaw to a rival gang, Espinoza demanded an answer about his gang affiliation. When Shaw hesitated, Espinoza opened fire. He first shot Shaw in the stomach. After Shaw fell, Espinoza fired again at close range, striking through his hands as he attempted to protect his face. Within an hour of the murder, Espinoza was spotted in a park by a Culver City police officer. The officer, unaware of the homicide, simply asked him to leave because the park was closed and recorded his vehicle license plate number. That record later assisted the Los Angeles Police Department in linking Espinoza to the crime. He was arrested shortly afterward and charged with murder. The case moved slowly through the courts. Espinoza was formally charged with first-degree murder, with special circumstances that made him eligible for the death penalty. Prosecutors presented testimony that Espinoza had declared his willingness to murder for his gang, even if it meant being sent to death row. The defense argued that his trial was unfair due to extensive publicity and raised issues of gang influence and immigration policy, but the court rejected those claims. On May 9, 2012, a jury found Espinoza guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Jamiel Shaw II, and the jury returned a verdict of death. Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge Ronald H. Rose imposed the sentence and ordered that Pedro Espinoza be transferred to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. During sentencing, members of Shaw's family addressed the court. His father, Jamiel Shaw Sr., spoke about preparing his son for an athletic career and a bright future, expressing deep grief that the opportunity was taken from him. His mother, Sergeant Anita Shaw, described receiving the news while deployed in Iraq and the devastation of losing her son. She admitted struggling with forgiveness, acknowledging that she was not strong enough to offer it at that time. Espinosa did not look at the family during their statements and remained motionless as they spoke. As of August 2025, Pedro Espinosa has served 17 years in custody since his arrest in March 2008. Number 17. Vincent Edward Brothers. On July 6, 2003, in Bakersfield, California, 5 members of the Harper family were brutally murdered inside their home. The victims were Joni Harper, aged 39 years old, her mother, Ernestine Harper, aged 70 years old, and Joni's 3 children, Marquez, aged 4 years old, Lindsay, aged 2 years old, and Marshall, who was 6 weeks old. The perpetrator was Vincent Edward Brothers, husband of Joni and father to the children, who was later convicted of their murders. Vincent Edward Brothers was 41 years old at the time of the crime. He was employed as vice principal of John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California. He held a bachelor's degree from Norfolk State University and a master's degree in education from California State University, Bakersfield. Brothers was regarded as a respected community member and had been married multiple times. His relationship with Joni Harper was strained by infidelity, separations, and reconciliation. They first married in 2000, annulled their union in 2001, and remarried in January 2003, while Joni was pregnant with their youngest child. By April 2003, Brothers had moved out of the family home. On Sunday, July 6, 2003, Joni, Ernestine, and the 3 children attended church services. Later that day, they returned home. At some point that afternoon, they were murdered inside the residence. Investigators later determined that Joni was likely shot first while asleep. Ernestine was also shot, then attacked with a knife several times after already dead. The children were each shot, and the youngest was partially concealed under blankets. The crime scene initially appeared to be a burglary. However, valuables remained untouched. 2 days later, on Tuesday, July 8, concerned family and friends discovered the bodies after Joni failed to appear at work and church. Authorities began investigating, with suspicion quickly centering on Vincent Brothers. At the time of the murders, Brothers had flown to Columbus, Ohio 4 days earlier, on July 2, to spend the holiday weekend with his brother. He claimed he remained in Ohio, and later traveled with his brother to North Carolina. Initially, this travel seemed to provide an alibi. However, detectives examined the rental car Brothers had used during his trip. The odometer showed approximately 5,600 miles, consistent with a round trip from Ohio to California and then to North Carolina. Forensic experts from the University of California, Davis, examined insect remains lodged in the radiator of the vehicle. They identified species native only to areas west of the Rocky Mountains. This evidence contradicted Brothers' claim that he never left Ohio. In April 2004, after further investigation, Vincent Brothers was arrested. Prosecutors argued that his motive was financial. By removing his wife and children, he would avoid divorce, alimony, and child support obligations. His mother-in-law, Ernestine Harper, was also murdered during the attack. The trial began in 2007 in Kern County, California, described at the time as one of the largest criminal trials in the region's history. Over 100 witnesses were called. Prosecutors highlighted Brothers' history of marital infidelity, previous domestic abuse, and his deceptive testimony. He was accused of lying on the witness stand more than 40 times. Brothers maintained his innocence, denying that he had traveled from Ohio to California during the holiday weekend. On May 15, 2007, a jury convicted Vincent Brothers of 5 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances for multiple murder, and the jury recommended the death penalty. During this time, jail staff discovered handmade keys hidden in his hair and noted that he attempted to compromise his restraints, leading to heightened security measures. On September 27, 2007, Superior Court Judge Michael Bush formally sentenced Brothers to death and ordered restitution. As of August 2025, Vincent Edward Brothers has served 18 years on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He remains incarcerated and under sentence of death, with no execution date scheduled. Number 18. Kevin Cooper. Kevin Cooper is a death row inmate currently held in California's San Quentin Prison. Cooper was convicted of 4 murders that occurred in the Chino Hills area of California in 1983. Cooper also admitted in court to the kidnapping and assault of an underage female in Pennsylvania during a burglary attempt, and was accused of assault by a second woman in California. Since his arrest, Cooper, who is African American, has become active in writing letters from prison, asserting his innocence, protesting racism in the American criminal justice system, and opposing the death penalty. Number 19. Charles Ng. Charles Ng Cheetat is a serial killer who committed numerous crimes in the United States. He is believed to have assaulted, tortured, and murdered between 11 and 25 victims with his accomplice Leonard Lake at Lake's Cabin in Calaveras County, California, in the Sierra Nevada foothills, 60 miles from Sacramento. After his 1985 arrest and imprisonment in Canada on robbery and weapons charges, followed by a lengthy dispute between Canada and the United States, Ng was extradited to California, tried, and convicted of 11 murders. He is currently on death row at San Quentin State Prison. Number 20. Randy Stephen Kraft. Randy Stephen Kraft is an American serial killer known as the Scorecard Killer, the Southern California Strangler, and the Freeway Killer, who murdered a minimum of 16 young men between 1972 and 1983, the majority of which were committed in California. Kraft is also believed to have committed the abuse and murder of up to 51 other boys and young men. He was convicted in May 1989 and is currently incarcerated on death row at San Quentin State Prison in Marin County, California. Kraft became known as the Scorecard Killer because, upon his arrest, investigators discovered a coded list containing cryptic references to his victims. He is also sometimes referred to as the Freeway Killer because many of his victims' bodies were discovered beside or near freeways. Thank you for watching.